What an entrance. So, it's great to have all of you back and to have all the experts here on the panel, because this is now going to be an open panel. This is the time to ask the experts questions. And I would like to get back to AMO, which is Oldřich Sklenář's organization, and the translation of Wikipedia is described as follows. With its activities, AMO offers non-partisan analyses and opens up spaces for well-founded debates. And this is precisely what we want to do. And we're going to take questions from the audience. I would suggest that the person asking tells us which expert the question is directed to, and this expert will reply, and if the others want to add something, they are of course free to do so. So let me have the first questions. There were a few questions we could not take because of lack of time. We've got 2 requests for the floor already. The lady on the right. Thank you, Anna Gustova. I am the chairperson of the Greens in Bohemia. I'm 1 out of 2 and also a member of the NGO Bohemian Mothers. And I would like to ask Matthias Englert. And my question is as follows. You may know that in Czechia, in the Czech Republic, Mr. Sklenář also said that very well, there is a boom of SMRs. Everybody believes that it's the brave new atomic world with small modular reactors. And we tried to find documentation that provides more truth about small modular reactors, and I couldn't find anything in the Czech Republic. When I looked further, I found the study by the Öko-Institut of Darmstadt from March 2021, and that was the analysis of technical safety and the assessment of utilization of small modular reactors. It's a fantastic study. My question to you, Mr. Englert, is did you update this study, or is there a new study with even more recent material about SMRs? And if not, are the facts that we find in the study still current, because it was a very, very extensive study with 136 historical and current SMR concepts. And another question. I only found one study of Stanford about nuclear waste coming from SMRs, saying that SMRs would produce more nuclear waste than conventional reactors. So if you know more about this, or if there is anything new available, please let me know. Thank you very much for the question. I hope you can hear me. Yeah, I'm getting a thumbs up. Yes, the 2021 study is still up to date, and basically it also covers the developments of the 10 years before it was published. SMRs came to the focus around 2010. They were first mentioned as a strategy for the industry to regain markets. And basically, nothing much has changed. There were a few further developments regarding the pre-licensing of systems being developed in Canada and the United States. A few things happened there, but by and large, the results are still current, they are still valid, especially as regards the economic perspective. As for anything more current, more recent, I can't think of any, because we're happy to be able to draw up such a study at all, because you need somebody who commissions such a paper, such a study, and who is interested in it, and that happens rarely. Rarely do people look for studies that take a neutral stance, and we really try to be objective. Of course, there might be different opinions about that, but at least we tried. And as for disposal of waste and waste in general, that's something that concerns both small modular reactors and large-scale systems. And the latest study that we published in 2023 also says a lot about SMRs. So all the high-temperature reactors are SMRs. They're all below 300 megawatts. So in terms of technical problems, issues, much also applies to SMRs, but disposal is a problematic matter, but I know the people who worked on the Stanford paper. It's a very good paper, but it's actually missing for many other technology lines, as we called it, and many other systems. More has to be done, and actually the Federal Agency for Nuclear Waste Disposal is actually looking into that. It's a project that is underway, and I hope that next year we will be able to say more about this. However, we'd be happy if other countries or groups were to do more about this.
Martin Watson, des Längeren.
Ja, danke. Vielleicht darf ich mich da noch kurz anschließen. Ich habe auch eine Broschüre mitgebracht, die wir mit unserer Bildungsorganisation gemacht haben, die heißt Kernkraft-Kurzschluss im Klimawandel, wo ich versuche auch Argumente mitzubringen, die gibt es ganz neu jetzt auch in Englisch zum Download bei der Freda, unserer Bildungswerkstatt zum Download. Vielleicht kann das beim Argumentieren helfen. Ich sage auch jetzt angesichts des Ukraine-Krieges, Atomkraft ist zur Gefahr geworden, auch in Konflikten, und wird auch zur Erpressung mittlerweile benutzt. Und wenn wir sicher leben wollen, dann geht es nur, wenn wir nicht dadurch bedroht werden können, im Konfliktfall, aber auch durch den Klimawandel. Es gibt eine Studie für die US Army, die zeigt ganz genau, wie die jetzigen Anlagen schon durch den Klimawandel bedroht sind, nicht nur durch steigenden Meeresspiegel, eben Stürme und Dürre und Co. Wir haben es schon gehört. Das heißt, eine sichere Zukunft haben wir nur dann, wenn wir auf diese Technologie verzichten. Und ich glaube, das könnte eine dieser Botschaften sein, die wir verbreiten müssen. Ich möchte mich nochmal bedanken, Günter, weil du das mit OSPA angesprochen hast und was da an Vergiftung betrieben wird. Ich habe teilweise Angst, also die Vermutung schon, es wird deswegen nicht nachgemessen und aufgearbeitet, damit man weiter die radioaktiven Abwässer zum Beispiel in Fukushima entsorgen kann und einen guten Vorwand hat. Und das bringt mich ein bisschen auf den Punkt, nämlich den zum Beispiel, was hat die IAEA sozusagen ermächtigt, in Japan darüber zu entscheiden, ob radioaktive verseuchte Abwässer ins Meer geleitet werden. Also wir müssten uns mal viel mehr die Frage stellen, was ermächtigt diese Organisation? Hier wird Umwelt, hier wird Wasser, hier werden Fische und Co. verstrahlt. Und warum darf diese Organisation darüber entscheiden, ob das gerecht ist oder nicht? Und nicht die WHO oder sonst irgendjemand, der für Umwelt, Gesundheit und Co. zuständig ist. Und das ist, glaube ich, eine dieser Fragen, die wir uns ganz stellen und wie wir meine Fragestellung wäre ein bisschen in die Richtung, wie wir das ändern können, diese Organisation zu entmachten und ihr zu erklären, dass sie dafür eigentlich gar nicht zuständig ist. Ja? Und das bringt mich auch kurz nach Frankreich, da haben wir voriges Jahr gesehen, die Flüsse werden quasi gekocht, weil man Strom produzieren will. Und die Atomaufsicht darüber entscheidet in Frankreich, dass die Flüsse zum Kochen gebracht werden dürfen. Warum darf eine Atomaufsicht darüber entscheiden, ob die Flüsse kochen dürfen? Warum ist da kein Umweltbundesamt oder Ähnliches zuständig, um das zu entscheiden? Auch hier die Frage, wer ermächtigt diese Organisationen, über unsere Umwelt zu entscheiden? Also auch hier müssen wir kritisch werden und bringt mich jetzt sozusagen auch teilweise zum letzten Punkt, PACSH. Eine nationale Atomaufsicht gibt eine Standortbewilligung auf einer Erdbebenbruchlinie. Wer ermächtigt sie dazu? Und warum gibt es darüber keine andere Atomaufsicht, zum Beispiel in der EU, die diese nationale Entscheidung anfechten darf, aufheben darf, damit es nicht mehr eine alleinige nationale Entscheidung ist, wenn es um die Sicherheit Europas geht? Und das wäre auch meine Fragestellung, wie wir dahin kommen können, dass wir in der EU eine Atomaufsicht bekommen, die auch dem Parlament unterstellt ist, ja, und nicht nebenbei auf Euratom rennt, sondern wo über parlamentarische und demokratische Wege hier diese Behörden zum Arbeiten beginnen können. Wie wir da sozusagen hinkommen, das braucht, weil wir werden noch viele Konflikte austragen müssen und da steht uns Euratom natürlich im Weg, solange die Macht haben. Deswegen muss das auch verlagert werden. Wir werden Wasserkonflikte haben. Nur ganz kurz eine letzte Zahl. Die Atomkraftwerke in der EU verdampfen einmal pro Jahr den Gesamtwasserverbrauch Österreichs. Das ist 4-mal der Neusiedlersee jedes Jahr. Und dass das Wasserkonflikte auslösen wird, jetzt im Zeichen des Klimawandels, ist klar. Und darauf, glaube ich, müssen wir uns vorbereiten. Und das ist auch eine spannende Frage, wie wir damit umgehen können.
Möchte am Podium gleich jemand etwas dazu sagen? Ich stelle es mir ja relativ schwierig vor, weil wir ja nicht einmal zusammengebracht haben, in Europa eine einheitliche Haftungsregelung zu implementieren. Ja, bitte, gern.
Ist das an? Nee, ist nicht an. Ist das an? Ja, das ist an. Ich glaube, ich würde gerne mal wieder zu diesem Narrativ zurückkommen und mal wirklich zu versuchen, in eine andere Richtung zu denken. Also wenn man mich fragt, wer entscheidet, ob Wasser von Fukushima in den Pazifischen Ozean eingeleitet wird, dann wären für mich an erster Stelle die Wale, die Haie, die anderen Fische, die würde ich entscheiden lassen. Und ich würde schon mal sagen, dass diese Entscheidung eventuell in eine bestimmte Richtung ausfällt. So. Also ich spreche das deswegen an, weil es war jetzt hier ein paar Mal davon die Rede, also jetzt auch unter uns zwischendurch, dass man einfach schon so lange dabei ist und vielleicht so ein bisschen ausgepowert ist oder so. Aber es gibt für mich eine sehr gute Initiative, auch unter anderem ausgehend von den Vereinten Nationen. Das ist die Harmony with Nature Initiative. Und da gibt es auch eine zivilgesellschaftliche Organisation, GAN, Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature. Mit denen haben wir zum Beispiel auch beim Weltklimagipfel in Bonn, die haben dann ein Tribunal veranstaltet und wir hatten da einen Atomteil sozusagen, eine Stellungnahme dazu. Und das ist was mich sozusagen international positiv stimmt, weil da sehr viele Leute drauf aufspringen und dieses Narrativ einfach eine Chance hat, also ich sehe es wirklich als Chance, dass ein Umdenkungsprozess stattfinden kann. So, und ich glaube, wenn dieser nicht stattfindet, dann werden wir einfach bestimmte Ziele, die wir brauchen als Gesellschaft, und das ist nicht eine westlich zivilisierte Konsumgesellschaft, sondern das ist für mich im Wesentlichen die internationale Natur und Indigenous Frontline Communities, die halt eben sich niemals werden ein Elektroauto leisten können und einfach in völlig anderen Dimensionen leben, denken und ihre Systeme strukturieren, als wir das tun. Und wenn wir das nicht in Frage stellen, dann werden wir in den nächsten Jahren ein echt immenses, ernsthaftes Problem bekommen. Und das ist auch den meisten Leuten nicht klar, dass diese intensiven Probleme ja für andere Menschen, sprich Indigenous Frontline Communities, schon seit Jahrhunderten bestehen. Ne? Und jetzt im Zusammenhang mit der Klimageschichte kann ich nur sagen, treiben sich unsere Politiker, auch grüne Politiker in anderen Staaten der Welt rum und machen neue Gasprojekte auf und legen für die nächsten Jahrzehnte fest, was wir dann benutzen. Sie können von mir aus gerne mal nach North-Dakota fliegen und sich angucken, wie so ein Fracking-Gas-Field aussieht, was dann demnächst in Rügen anlandet. Ne, das sind alles Dinge, die wir im Zusammenhang betrachten müssen. Und dann werden wir vielleicht eine Lösung finden. Und die ersten Schritte, die in die Richtung gehen, heißt reduzieren. Es gibt eine Nachricht, hatte ich letztens, ich weiß nicht mehr genau wo, irgendwo gelesen, eine Produktionsfirma relativ stolz darauf, dass sie jetzt über die Hälfte ihrer Produktion mit nachhaltigen, erneuerbaren Energien abdeckt, sozusagen. Dann stellt sich natürlich die Frage, was ist das für eine Firma und was produzieren die? Die produzieren Aluminium-Getränkedosen. Ne? Also so kommt man nicht weiter.
My question is about the financial funding, the funding for SMRs by the governments, actually governmental funding as such. And specifically, my question is, are government funds still an impulse for a state to launch a project, or are public funds meaningless permanent institutions? And how could the governments be caused to call its own funding system into question and see whether funds could be discontinued for certain projects? Maybe I can try to say something about that. Funding models that we've had in the past 10 years and were very well liked, included funding for startup companies which got seed money from private investors and then very quickly tried to get public funding. And this strategy worked so well because you could not really make money from money. Risk capital, seed capital was readily available, and even very risky startup businesses which promised things that weren't really trustworthy got money and started getting governmental money in parallel. So, of course, in countries like the United States, there is an interest in using startup companies and to provide them with public fundings. And at some point, you find out that the promises are taken back and the small energy systems are getting ever closer to the big corporations. And basically, This stops when billions need to be invested. Everybody gets cautious when that happens. If you think of the prismatic high-temperature reactor in the United States, the launch of the industrial the startup and the state, and the industrial consortium started fighting over who would put the money on the table first, and that caused the project to fail. It wasn't pursued, and this also goes for the nuclear energy funding program of the United States. What can we do? It all depends on the nation you're talking about. There's always going to be some interest in continued funding of nuclear energy and also to keep the expertise alive. This goes for Germany, but the funds might not be used for the development of reactors. I don't know what you can do against it. You can only try to convince the funding agencies that this is a highly risky endeavor and will most likely fail. And it's a message that you simply need to repeat over again. At some point, I was interested in trying to find private investors who I could advise that their investment or their planned investment was bound to fail. I was interested in being kind of a counter-advisor, but nobody really listened to me. They like listening to the big promises rather than the critics. So you end up with the opposite that you wanted to achieve.
Jestli můžu krátkou reakci v češtině.
May I just respond? As for investments, it doesn't matter whether it's a private investor or the state that invests. Investors often do not understand what the SMR concept is about. It's not about developing a reactor. That's complicated enough, but many people can actually do that. It's about the reactor fulfilling the parameters that have been promised, like being modular, being cheaper, being advantageous. So it's about an entire production line, a range of products, and also a supply chain that needs to be guaranteed. It may not be the best technology, but hardly anybody will invest in a startup business promising to build an airplane, because it's not just a matter of developing the airplane, but also of creating the manufacturing capacities. There are existing companies that produce airplanes, and the same goes for nuclear reactors. So there are lots and lots of peoples, of entities developing SMRs or pretending to develop them. And once the concept is introduced in reality, only a few will survive and be able to produce these reactors, and the remainder of the money that was invested will be gone.
Thank you. I think this question is natural to send to Mr. Englert. It's about the SMRs and how to regulate them. Thinking about the goals of the industry, it seems obvious that the industry has the goal to be able to make the nuclear technology more available instead of making it more energy efficient. For us, it seems more easy to think of the countries that should not buy the SMR technology instead of thinking about the countries that should buy the SMR technology. And the IAEA seems to lack the... they haven't addressed this issue so much. What kind of requirements should we put towards the countries that can buy this kind of technology? What should we think of? Which countries should definitely not buy SMR? Thank you.
I think this question is somehow directed. Should be working like, okay. Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's quite complicated that someone is deciding what someone else is supposed or not supposed to do. That's the first thing. The second thing, it's quite tough to argument that someone is not allowed to do what we are doing. I know that Austria is not having nuclear power plants and Norway is not having nuclear power plants, but Europe is having nuclear power plants. So what is our argument in telling other countries that they are not supposed to have them? And then, in general, like, there are rules of procedure, what kind of bodies should be installed in a country, what kind of prerequisites should be fulfilled in a newcomer state by the IAEA to be able to handle a nuclear power plant safely, whatever that means. And these procedures, they apply as well to small modular reactors. But if we agree with them or not, it doesn't matter so much, because we are not living in a world, not as much, like where the people who decide can decide what others are supposed to do. Yes, yeah. Dankeschön. Ich habe noch eine Frage zu Oldřich.
Thank you. I have a question to Oldřich,
Ich spreche Deutsch.
and I'm going to speak German.
Du hast uns vorhin gezeigt, dass
You
man bei
showed us that there are a variety of concepts between 100 and 800 megawatts for Temelin, if I recall correctly. You said that the environmental impact assessment is underway and might soon be completed, and that the licensing procedure will be opened soon. But how can you actually do that if you don't really know what the output is going to be? A very good question. I must admit that I really don't know how they are going to deal with this. It doesn't make much sense. The point is probably to find a range that certain suppliers can provide. But this question shouldn't go to me, but a representative of ČEZ. I'm not a representative of ČEZ, but I think that I can answer. In my career in the anti-nuke movement, I've been involved in numerous IAEA environmental impact assessments, and basically, in the end, the reactor will always fulfill the requirements. It is incredible for me, because if you do that for a department store, you have to know everything, whereas for a reactor, you just have to know the reactor type in very general, This is how environmental impact assessments are run in the Czech Republic.
Thank you. Matthias again from Slovenian Ecological Movement Society. I have a question for Oldřich. And yes, we have heard a lot of words about technologies, reactors and locations in Czechs, but only one word or one sentence about nuclear waste. Is there nothing to say about nuclear waste? Do you even don't plan to build it? Or if it's so that there's nothing to say, it should be the theme of the next conference, nuclear waste, because you have made a wonderful parallel airplane. Can you imagine airplanes in the air and no airport? Where they land, or they will fall to the people as nuclear reactors will throw waste to the people. Thank you.
Ano, to je, zase nevím, jestli je ještě v místnosti, ale jsou to určitě větší experti na koncept.
Well, the greater experts than me regarding nuclear waste disposal than me, but actually deep storage was chosen, and every few years a technical study is being updated without actually identifying a location. So it just describes the technical procedure. I don't know the procedure in detail, but this should be the basis of the choice of location. And to my mind, it's actually a bad practice. It's basically something that happens in a situation where the community level does not have the power to reject that deep storage. So we're going to have deep storage. We have price calculations, and there's a big question about the geological conditions. We don't know what it's going to cost because we only have an estimate, and it might not be a realistic figure. And at the same time, I consider it a technical problem because looking at the oldest plants in the world, the oldest structures in the world, these are being built for 200 or 300 years. Of course, the pyramids are thousands of years old, but normally bridges don't have a lifetime of thousands of years. But with the deep storage, we need to build something that separates highly radioactive material from the biosphere. And this is actually happening at a time when this overcharges our engineering capabilities. And actually, we should know how much it costs. I have my doubts about it, but the experts and the Czech government have a different opinion. So it probably doesn't answer your question, but unfortunately, it's not something that I've dealt with in great depth.
Yeah. Wiener Plattform Atomkraftfrei.
I'm from the No Nuke Vienna platform.
Eine kurze Frage.
My thoughts keep revolving around the hope that this is going to be like the real estate bubble, some kind of investment bubble that bursts after SMR concepts have been drawn up for a long time, but the process is never over. Do we have to expect this to take 100 years? To me, it's like a house of cards that ought to topple at some point. There is no real solution for anything, not for waste, not for the actual reactors. And if I were an investor, I would like to actually have some return on my investment. Well, I think Matthias would like to answer that, and but it was directed to me. Okay, so I'll answer. Well, very often people say that society does not support the project, government doesn't support the project by funding, and basically responsibility is moved back and forth, and nobody really wants to touch the whole thing and finalize it. Yeah, let me add that my expectation is as follows. The startup bubble is going to burst. And once you can use your risk your risk capital or your seed capital for other purposes, you will move out of that sector. I can't really see this going on for another 10 or 20 years, but there are strategic considerations of some players and some states to be active in that market. Some states are still convinced that nuclear energy is the way to go, and the private sector companies will want to make money on that. Otherwise, all states would need to decide that they're not interested in using nuclear power. As regards to use case, I don't think that SMRs are really very useful systems, except for very distant, remote locations. One could think about military use, but I'm not really sure about that either. Probably companies will continue developing SMRs, will try to develop the market for it, will try to get governmental funding to keep running their development departments, but it's going to be reduced. It's not going to be the same boom as in the past 10 years. To give you an example, with the molten salt reactor, there were lots of startup companies that got lots of government funding, but they never went radioactive, as it were. They never got any radioactive material, and the model simply says that molten salt processes are being used in various manufacturing industries, and they can also be very useful, for example, to store heat. And basically what they develop is molten salt processes and molten salt plants, but they never go radioactive. They drive other developments. These are things that I see happening among startups all the time, and I also expect that governmental funding will continue, but to a reduced extent. And I think that one of my main arguments in one of my slides was that the costs per unit of electricity is so much higher that there must be some other interest. whether you're stuck with nuclear energy, like in France, or whether you have global strategic interests by getting other countries on board, like Russia, or that you have a major industry like the United States. So it could be anything from a global political strategy to a decision of countries to say, well, if I have civilian nuclear power, I also have a foot in the door to military uses. This is a strategy that is actually used worldwide.
So to speak, larger audience. And I have a question that relates to Slovenia and the two governments, the Austrian province government in the provinces of Carinthia and the province of Styria. Because the fact is that in Slovenia, over the last 30 years, we have seen a decline in terms of freedom of speech when it comes to environmental matters and nuclear-related matters. 30 years ago, we were able to, we as the anti-atomic movement, we were able to prevent that the whole country was not covered with nuclear power plants, because we, as representative of the nuclear movement, immediately joined in public discussions. You know, these public discussions which took place in connection with the permits to enable the construction of a nuclear power plant. And whenever there were such citizens' discussions, we went there, and experts were also there, and they laughed about us. But after 1 hour, they left the room. They left these rooms for public discussions, because they noticed that the locals who were present in these meetings all of a sudden became very unfriendly towards them, towards the pro-nuclear people. And this, thanks to our commitment, this enabled us to prevent the establishment of new nuclear power plants, and the only location is Krško in Slovenia. But last week we heard that the operational period of Krško will be extended for further 10 years. Although we protested against it, we issued documents, we also submitted official objections. And what have we noticed? That nevertheless the operational period was extended. What have we noticed? That the province government from Carinthia and Styria have not objected against this extension. We were the only ones to object the extension of the service life of Krško. And 1/3 of our arguments was accepted, but only those arguments that can well considered as not material in this document. And now the operating period of Krško has been extended for 10 years. And I ask myself, why can the government here in Linz, and I would also say the government in Vienna, how can they stand up against nuclear power? And why are they so successful in efficiently fighting the nuclear lobby? But the province governments in Carinthia and Styria, they only act as if they were against the nuclear power plants, but in reality representatives of the Styrian and Carinthian government come to Ljubljana, come to Krško, And they are happy because they say, well, the nuclear power plants work perfectly, so why should we stop at this nuclear power plant? And I believe that it's high time in Austria to publicly address this topic, the topic of nuclear power plants and the extension of the operating period of Krško. And in Slovenia, we have seen a radical decline in terms of public discussions. In the newspapers and also on TV, we are not allowed to appear. My colleague Valencic, well, he's like the last man standing. He writes letters to the newspapers, and out of 5 texts, 1 letter to the editor is published. But I have just given up writing letters to the editor because what I believe, it is necessary to ask yourself a fundamental question. What EU country is it if there is no freedom of speech for those who want to stand up against nuclear power? And I ask you, why is it possible that 1 or 2, and I would even say the Minister for Environmental Affairs of Austria, so she announced that taxonomy, that she wants to object against taxonomy, the European Court. And so together with her, there are 1 or 2 other outstanding figures who want to fight against taxonomy. But then there are those other province governors who, well, lure somewhere in the back, and they act as if they were against the nuclear power plant in Austria. But as soon as they have crossed the border to Slovenia, they're super happy about the great nuclear power plant in Krško. Thank you.
Martin Litschauer, the member of the National Council, said that he wanted to reply.
Yeah, thank you very much for again addressing this very important topic. I've also done so, and it really hurts me. Yeah, definitely, it is a pain, because in Parliament I had really submitted motions against the extension of the operation period of Krško, and we tried to cooperate with other countries, Italy and other neighboring states, in order to draw the attention to the environmental impact assessment, to have as many as possible on board in the context of this process. And actually, representatives of Styria and others went there to Slovenia. They had meetings, agreed on matters. But these agreements were not coordinated, neither with us nor with the authorities, and actually they undermined the strategy on the statement with a view to the environmental impact strategy, because this undermined our efforts. So thanks again for criticizing the province representative of Styria and Carinthia, because we would have been very happy if there had been new analysis regarding the earthquake safety in connection with the extension of the operating period, because if there had been latest findings, this would have helped us. But they have not considered that, because they said, well, this might only be interesting in terms of future generators, but earthquake safety is important for Krško, for the existing nuclear power plant, and we have to focus that when it comes to earthquake safety, it must be state-of-the-art, but Krško is far away from state-of-the-art, and I absolutely understand this criticism voiced vis-à-vis the provinces of Styria and Carinthia, and would be better to coordinate approaches in the future and not to do things single-handedly, and this really shocked me. And actually in Parliament, Parliament, I really supported filing this charge against taxonomy with the European Parliament. Well, although it has not been dealt with, but there is a minor success. There is this discussion in connection with the green hydrogen, and the legal framework presented does no longer include nuclear energy for the generation of green hydrogen. I hope it stays the way it is currently being proposed. But here, at least, you noticed that, the strong approach taken by Austria has been effected, and we were able to prevent nuclear energy from being mentioned in connection with greening hydrogen. Yeah, and we want to make sure that this also holds true for taxonomy in the future. So no nuclear power. Okay, this slowly brings us to the end of our open panel discussion. Well, we have one or two questions. We have time for one or two questions. So who has raised their hand? Who wants to ask a question? Eda? Edo?
Omlouvám se za češtinu a cvičení sluchání.
Hello, I will speak now in my native language, Czech. My friends, for a colleague from Slovenia, well, I want to highlight that it's the topic of taxonomy and of nuclear power plants is a major issue. Taxonomy also covers final storage by 2015, and this has a major impact on the Czech Republic as well, because we have to guarantee the safety, or we have to prove that the final repository is safe. So today's, the Nuclear Energy Conference of 2018, here the topic of nuclear waste was discussed in Prague. Yeah, it was a topic for us. But now a question. The international agency simplifies the licensing rules for small modular reactors, and the Czech Republic is very active in this connection. And our state authorities claim that there is a hurdle for rolling out SMRs. When it comes to licensing, not only for a construction permit, but also licensing for nuclear power plants and SMRs in general is to be simplified. Will we be able to prevent that a dangerous precedent is being created, that the strict regulations are being diluted? Because if they are being diluted for SMRs, then this will also be diluted for the large nuclear power plants. Well, simplification, well, let's call it standardizing. And I don't think that this does not yet hold true for the Czech case. This is our light water reactors they are currently focusing on. Although I'm not an expert in the Czech rules and regulation, I assume that a license will be granted to them based on the current rule. I don't know whether Oldřich has more detailed information on that, because, well, the time plan is 8 years, and we need to revise the rules. And I don't think that the IAEA will publish new guidelines, which then have to be translated into local regulation. But you could also use as an orientation the American legislation, but then also have to be transferred into local regulations. Well, frankly, I don't know more than you do. We tap into the same sources of information, and the latest presentation of the State Authority for Nuclear Safety was as she stated that modifications will be implemented, but the paper has not been specific on the modifications. Yes, you are right. That is also plays a role here. So, yeah, maybe they have to become compatible. Yes, maybe this will also hold true for the SMRs.
Já bych se asi chtěla zeptat na to též.
Well, I wanted to ask the same question, and I will also use Czech language so to make sure that my colleague understands. In the Czech Republic, a process will be launched, a process that is related to the safety standards. And the survey published by the Institute in Darmstadt, it says that regulatory requirements based on graded, staggered use are to be implemented. And Friederike, you said that, if I got you right, that uniform statement will be, or uniform standard will be adopted, so there are no special regulations for the small reactors, so that the small reactors are to achieve the level required, and that harmonization started only in 2022 to make sure, no efforts have been undertaken to make sure that the safety level is to be lifted up to a certain standard, but obviously we do not know how long this process will take, the standardization process. Well, in principle, every national state is free in taking decisions. So rules and regulations have to be adopted, and based on that you have to decide which requirements a reactor has to meet in order to get a license for a certain site. And the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, has some standards, but these standards are not legally binding. So these non-legally binding standards can be taken over into the state legislation. And there is this group within the IAEA that considers how such standards are to look like. And they now want to make sure what to do in order to make sure that these standards are also applicable for SMRs. But the committee says that they do not negotiate the safety standards that are appropriate for SMRs. So they want to make sure what to do in order to make sure that such standards can be applicable for SMRs. And in 2022, an initiative was launched, and the initiative seeks to harmonize and standardize things to have some planning reliability. But the initiative, well, they can consider what they would like to see, but this is not an official IAEA recommendation, and this is no official national rule. That's the thing. Thank you for this important final. We have to come to an end. Please give me 1 minute. Yeah, final question. Thank you. Yes, in autumn, we have 45 years after Zwentendorf, and for Austria and the entire anti-nuclear and renewable energy movement, this is a very important year, and this is my request. You as experts, please share these arguments against SMRs with the world at large. Please provide us with a list of arguments. We also need to present it at political level. And the anti-nuclear coordinator of Upper Austria needs to share the relevant information with each and everybody at the political level, because we require self-empowerment. This is the only way forward. And I believe 45 years after Zwentendorf will give us some fresh impetus. Thank you very much for giving me the time. Okay, just brief answer. such a paper is being prepared. This is part of the concept. Yes, such a paper is being prepared. And this brings us to the end of this year's conference, not because we do not want to keep on discussing, because it is as a sound engineers, and the sound engineers are to finish by 4:30. The interpreters were outstanding as far as I could assess that. Thanks a lot. Interpreters, thank the local sound engineering and street park sound engineering worked excellently, even better than ever before. And we would also like to thank Anna for having shown the presentations and everything, for having managed everything so nicely. So in principle, it's a good sign to have so much interest, so many questions that we want to keep on discussing. It's clear that not everything has been said and dealt with. And also during the breaks, we noticed the top quality of the input by experts. They have really given us food for thought. And most of all, I would like to thank Matthias Englert for being connected. And during the break, I got a lot of positive feedback on your keynote, on your input. And since you could not attend during the breaks, I would like to share that to you. A big hand and thanks a lot to Darmstadt. Oh, thanks a lot. Thanks. I would have loved to be with you. And I would like to join in, and I would also like to thank the speakers here. It's so great that this idea has really paid off, by sharing technical detail, discussing the backgrounds, then the political, legal aspect, the licensing. So then a specific example, the Czech Republic, who are at the forefront here, and then you see this as the report of a lifetime by a lobbyist. Yeah, we need to fight and stand up against what is going on. And the great concluding remarks and works by Christiana, it has been like a huge bunch of flowers. And I talked about the right to have a nice